Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Amy Morris. Here are the stories we're following today.
First, the latest developments out of the Middle East. Israel and Hamas are signaling that a temporary ceasefire could be extended beyond today. Under the current agreement, Hamas is releasing 50 hostages in exchange for 150 Israeli-held prisoners. President Biden says he's aiming for this break in fighting to continue.
Critically needed aid is going in and hostages are coming out. And this deal is structured so that it can be extended to keep building on these results. That's my goal. That's our goal, to keep this pause going beyond tomorrow.
And President Biden spoke yesterday with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who signaled an extension was possible.
Meanwhile, Israel is coming under increasing pressure to agree to an extension of a 4-day pause in its war with Hamas. We get more from Bloomberg's Simon Marx in Tel Aviv.
Israel is under some pressure to continue the sort of slow drip releasing hostages. There is still a lot of public pressure here to get many more released, and the families, the victims of the hostage families are still very active.
Bloomberg's Simon Marx says so far Hamas has handed over 58 hostages, including non-Israelis. It is slated to free another 11 Israelis today to fulfill the 4-day agreement.
And in Washington, the issue of Israeli aid may be getting more complicated. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has that story.
Senator Chris Murphy is saying lawmakers should consider conditioning future aid to Israel based on compliance with international humanitarian law.
I think there's both a moral cost to this many civilians, innocent civilians, children often losing their life, but I think there's a strategic cost. Ultimately, Hamas will get stronger, not weaker, in the long run if all of this civilian death allows them to recruit more effectively and ably inside Gaza.
Murphy on CNN says the civilian death toll must stop. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
Thanks, Ed. Another complicating factor in aid to Israel and Ukraine is a dispute over security at the southern border. Republicans in Congress want to tie foreign military assistance to tougher border policies. On NBC's Meet the Press, House Intelligence Chair Mike Turner said it will be tough to pass the aid before the end of this year while the issue remains unresolved.
And Amy, events in the Middle East may be forcing President Biden to skip an event he's attended the past 2 years. According to the New York Times, a White House official says the president will not be at the COP28 climate summit in Dubai. The official didn't say why, but senior aides are suggesting the Israel-Hamas war has consumed the president in recent weeks.
Meanwhile, Elon Musk will today meet with Israel's prime minister and president, as well as representatives of the families of hostages held in Gaza. The closed-door meeting appears to be an effort to diffuse a growing backlash over the billionaire's endorsement of an anti-Semitic tweet. While Musk has drawn support from notable figures, including hedge fund manager Bill Ackman, others, including British Prime Minister Rishi Sunek, say the Tesla and SpaceX chief should not be given a pass because of who he is.
I don't tend to get in the business of scrutinizing what every single person says who I've interacted with. Of course I abhor anti-Semitism. It doesn't matter whether you're Elon Musk or you're someone on the street who's shouting abuse at someone who happens to be walking past you. That's wrong in all its forms. Anti-Semitism in all its forms is completely and utterly wrong.
Sunak's careful criticism comes just weeks after the British Prime Minister had a fireside conversation with Musk at the UK AI Summit.
Turning to markets, Amy, stocks are going higher. That's the call from Deutsche Bank. The firm's strategists, including Binky Chadha, predict the S&P 500 will rally to a record 5,100 by the end of next year. That's about 12% above current levels. Chadha says stock valuations are not high and earnings are growing solidly.
Meanwhile, Wall Street returns to work with lots of economic data and plenty of earnings reports. We get a preview from Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet.
Tech earnings will be in focus this week with Zscaler and CrowdStrike Holdings underscoring how businesses are prioritizing cybersecurity after recent high-profile corporate hacks. Among the other technology companies reporting this week, Salesforce and Dell in New York. Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Radio.
Okay, Charlie, thanks. We're also keeping an eye on retailers today. Well, because it's Cyber Monday, the huge online spending day comes after shoppers spend a record online on Black Friday. More on that from Bloomberg's Eddie Vanderwalt.
What we're seeing is that U.S. consumers spend a record $9.1 billion online. That's according to Adobe Analytics. And it's a record so far. But we're seeing two interesting trends. Number one, a lot of people are spending on buy now, pay later. And we are seeing them buying less luxury items with this spending. So it feels like the consumer is starting to feel the pinch. And rather than going out spending big money, is saying, look, this might be a good opportunity to start cutting back our spending.
Bloomberg's Eddie Vanderwalt says global Black Friday sales rose 22%, led by clothing, personal care, and jewelry.
The owner of TikTok is cutting jobs. ByteDance plans to eliminate hundreds of positions in gaming and wind down its showpiece brand Uverse. The closure marks ByteDance's biggest retreat from a once booming gaming industry dominated by Tencent and its smaller foe NetEase. Sources say the Chinese company intends to announce the cuts later today. Time now for a look at some of the other stories making news around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's John Tucker. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Amy. The U.S. is investigating whether Iran was behind an incident in which missiles were fired near the Navy destroyer USS Mason. The Mason intervened to stop the hijacking of a commercial cargo ship by pirates in the Gulf of Aden near Somalia on Sunday, after which 2 ballistic missiles were fired from Yemen toward the Navy destroyer. The ballistic missiles were fired from the part of Yemen controlled by Iranian-backed Houthi rebels. They fell well short of the mark. We could be looking at a shakeup in the battery industry that's critical for the energy transition. Battery giants are starting to put their money on a new sodium-based technology. Let's get more in this report from Bloomberg's Denise Pellegrini.
Sodium from rock salt and brines is cheaper and way more abundant than the lithium widely used now in batteries. But in the past week alone, Sweden's Northvolt said it made a breakthrough, and China's EV maker BYD signed a deal to build a $1.4 billion sodium-ion battery plant. Also, China's CATL said back in April its sodium-based batteries would be used in some vehicles starting this year. This could all hit lithium demand hard. Bloomberg EDF has said sodium could cut hundreds of thousands of tons of lithium demand by 2035. Denise Pellegrini, Bloomberg Radio.
This post-Thanksgiving travel rush could be one for the books. American Airlines said it flew 6.5 million customers over the holiday, the highest ever for the airline. Well, this traveler at Newark Liberty Airport spoke for many.
I travel from California to New York back and forth all the time. I have never had this much of a wait. I don't know why.
American says it had more than 6,100 departures Sunday and expects about 6,000 flights today. The Biden administration today will announce a redoubling of measures to strengthen supply chains. It's creating a new White House Council on Supply Chain Resilience. The council will conduct a supply chain review mirroring similar strategic documents prepared for national defense and homeland security. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Amy.
All right. Thank you, John. We bring you news throughout the day here on Bloomberg Radio, but now you can get the latest news on demand whenever you want it. Subscribe to Bloomberg News Now to get the latest headlines at the click of a button. Get informed on your schedule, and you can listen and subscribe to Bloomberg News Now on the Bloomberg Business app, Bloomberg.com, plus Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Time now for our Bloomberg Sports Update. And for that, we bring in John Stashower.
Amy, the game of the day was in Philadelphia. The Eagles trailed Buffalo by 10 points in the fourth quarter, trailed by 3 with 20 seconds to go, and Jake Elliott tied the game with a 59-yard field goal. Philly also trailed in overtime, but Jalen Hurts scored a touchdown, and the Eagles beat the Bills 37-34. Philly is 10-1. The Bills having a disappointing season at 6-6. The Patriots having a really disappointing season. They are 2-9. Lost to the Giants 10-7 when Chad Ryland missed a 35-yard field goal with 3 seconds to go. Ravens last night improved to 9-3. They beat the Chargers 20-10. The Steelers are 7-4. All 7 wins by 7 points or less. They've been outscored on the season, but Pittsburgh able to win at Cincinnati 16-10. Bengals playing without the injured quarterback Joe Burrow. Carolina dropped to 1-10, lost to Tennessee 17-10. Indianapolis beat Tampa Bay 27-20. Michael Pittman had over 100 yards in receptions. 2 SEC schools with new football coaches at Texas A&M. It's Mike Elko. He had been at Duke the last 2 years, and the previous to that, he was the Aggies defensive coordinator. Mississippi State's new coach is Jeff Lebby. He had been the offensive coordinator at Oklahoma. Another F1 win for Max Verstappen. That's 19 out of 22 races. That's the most ever. Celtics still unbeaten at home. They beat the Hawks 113-103. Jason Tatum scored 34. John Stashauer, Bloomberg Sports.
From coast to coast, from New York to San Francisco, Boston to Washington, D.C., nationwide on SiriusXM, the Bloomberg Business app, and Bloomberg.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager. Today is scheduled to be the final full day of a 4-day truce between Israel and Hamas. But after the release of dozens of hostages from Gaza, including a 4-year-old American-Israeli girl, both sides are now signaling this pause could be extended. And for the latest, we're joined from Tel Aviv by Bloomberg News reporter Simon Marx. Simon, good morning. What is the likelihood that we could see an extension given the number of hostages that have been released so far?
Well, so far, the chances of this taking place seem to be making some good progress. Hamas has released a statement saying that, in theory, they would agree to an extension. And Israel, for the whole way along, this current truce has said that it would be open to further days. So we're talking about 10 per day. For up to 10 days. Diplomats in the city do expect that we will see 1 or 2 more days. It's a little unclear whether we're going to get to the full 10, but there is obviously a lot of pressure on the government of Benjamin Netanyahu to continue the release of the hostages, with the families still campaigning and very vocal on this front.
Yeah, that's happening on the outside. Talk a little bit more about, as well, the behind-the-scenes pressure that's happening with Israel and Hamas to potentially secure a further ceasefire.
Yeah, I think the main reason for this is that the international community would like to see more aid get into Gaza. Obviously, the Strip has been pounded for weeks now. There's still at least 100,000 people in the north with very, very limited access to any form of humanitarian care. And then in the south, you've got over 1 million displaced people in really devastating conditions. So there were 200 trucks that managed to get over the border from Egypt on Sunday. There's been about 2,000 in total, but the hope is that increases a lot more in the coming days.
What's the feeling about whether there is enough aid going in right now, and whether that aid could potentially be used to support Hamas? There has to still be that concern among the Israelis, right?
Yeah, of course. And, this is part of the reason why the bureaucracy around getting trucks in, the checks and balances from the Israelis were so stern. And it's also part of the reason why getting aid in was actually difficult in the beginning. That does seem in recent days to have opened up. There is this notion that, if Israel is to continue its ground offensive against Hamas, that in return, they cannot be seen to be blocking aid, and flouting international humanitarian law. But yes, Hamas fighters are spread throughout the Gaza Strip, and many people seem to think that they have a presence in the south too, where there are a lot of civilians.
And that factors into a lot of the commentary that we're hearing from particularly congressional Democrats in Washington, D.C., that future aid to Israel might need to be conditioned on international humanitarian law being followed more stringently. How is that potentially factoring in to Israel's decision-making when it comes to extending the pause in fighting or carrying on this war even further whenever the pause ends, it does end?
Well, very much so. Israel are extremely dependent on diplomatic and material support from the United States. Without that, I think, the pressure for them to stop this war is going to mount. So far, we've seen a lot of pressure from Biden's administration to make sure Israel do allow aid in, but there hasn't been, a stringent call for any longer-term ceasefire. So it does seem that this green light, essentially, for Israel to go back in to the Gaza Strip once this truce comes to an end is very much there, even though perhaps in some other corners of the world, particularly the Gulf and parts of Europe, obviously the pressure is mounting. But yeah, as we all know, the main bidder here is the United States.
And as this pause continues, Simon, are there risks of other fronts opening while the pause goes on? I mean, there's been sporadic fighting that we've been reporting on in the West Bank, as well as the back and forth over the Israeli-Lebanon border.
Yes, definitely. As you mentioned, the West Bank, just overnight, there has been a report there were 8 Palestinians killed in the West Bank in an airstrike. The situation is very restive there. That there is growing settler violence since October 7. Jewish settlers in the area have carried out way over 200 attacks on Palestinian communities. And the Israeli army have also come down pretty tough on demonstrators and suspected sympathizers of Hamas. The population there in general feels like it's being occupied and oppressed, and that the Palestinian Authority, which runs the show there in some areas, isn't really representative of them. Obviously, if things continue in this direction, there's massive risks of it boiling over. And then, I think beyond that, beyond Israel's borders, so far, it has been more or less contained, but it's very, very worrying. We saw Israel strike the airport in Damascus not that long ago, targeting Iranian targets there. So clearly, it's a huge risk.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, SiriusXM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Amy Morris. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.